Welcome to American Issues Take One on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about if Trump has his way, what will the country look like? How soon will we reach the end state, and what will it be? Our co-host for the show is Ben Davis. Our esteemed guest for the show, David Larson, professor at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law, and Chuck Crumpton, mediator. Welcome to the show, all of you. You know, it's increasingly difficult to find a plan in Trump's actions, but we can and should try to connect the dots and try to see where it is all going and how will it be if he has his way. So today, it would be ideal if we could cover all these things where he is trying to do things or destroy things, as the case may be. And I list them for you briefly: the economy, manufacturing, technology, world trade, public health, education, civil rights, voting rights, the rule of law, the legal community, democracy, the Congress, the courts, the federal government, immigration, the military, Greenland, Mexico, Panama, relations with Russia and the EU, the Middle East, and Ukraine, China, and Asia. He's a very, very busy guy. So let's start with you, Ben. You know, what is the end state of all of this if Trump has his way on these various issues, which he is trying to change things?
The vastness of the question is got me kind of hesitant to say. So the only thing that came to mind, and I would love to hear what our co-panelists think too about this, is with Reagan, there was kind of an acceleration of inequality. It started in the 70s, but it really accelerated with him. I would think that if Trump got his way, you'll have like a hyper inequality in the United States, with the middle class, the poor, generally doing worse, and the top 10%, 1%, 0.1% doing magnificently well. Secondly, if he has his way, there will not be dissent, because the federal government and the state governments will work to suppress dissent, as we're seeing going on with First Amendment issues right now. The third thing is with respect to actual problems that arise. Essentially, we'll go back to the system that we had maybe in the late 19th century, where it was kind of the very rich would help out, sort of, with there was a fire, you hopefully had some rich person who would decide out of the goodness of his or her heart to spend some money to help pay for some fire people to put out forest fire or something like that. Obviously, the tariffs would lead to the same kind of regressive revenue streams that we had prior to 1913 in the income tax. And then if we look on the international, I would think, and I may again be very wrong on this, that China will run hegemony with regards to Taiwan and around Asia. I don't think the Russians necessarily are capable of. It will be kind of a rump third power, but it has nuclear weapons. And the United States will have sort of its Monroe Doctrine fiefdom running from the Arctic all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, with us inflicting our will on everyone in our space. This leaves a battle for Africa, right? A battle only for the riches of Africa. No care about the actual people, and the Middle East for that matter. And then we have Europe, that is, i.e. Europe that is we call it Western Europe. Do we get back to just good old rivalry among the European states, like they did for so many centuries? I don't know, but basically not having the United States doing what, Eisenhower apparently didn't want the Europeans to rearm because they had so many wars. And so the United States nuclear umbrella was there to basically keep them from rearming. Well, now we're asking them to rearm. Well, where will that take? So I don't know. I just kind of see the United States being more people will be poorer, sicker, and dumber because and the world will kind of be divided into three big areas: Asia, run by the Chinese, um, Russia, sort of some parts of Europe, and the Americas by us. And a classic late 19th century scramble for African and Middle Eastern assets. There's the image. I imagine. Okay, maybe there also be what a Trump Gaza. There might be a Trump Gaza too in all this.
Chuck, let's go to you. What do you see as the end state, assuming Trump gets what he wants? Although we don't know exactly what he wants, we can only guess what he really wants on all these things. But where are we going with this? What is the end state you see, and when will we be able to see it clearly?
For some reason, the impact on and the effects and the perspective of the children looms really large to me. And so I hear what Ben's saying, and I'm visualizing children who see all around them a race-based, caste-based, very discriminatory, very hostile educational system, housing, healthcare, environment, across the board, everywhere they look. And how the children see each other and how they treat each other are going to be the real questions if these things take place. Because it will be race-based, it will be gender-based, it will be caste-based. It is already. And it will be with absolute, complete disregard for humanity, for morality, for anything that makes people's ability to live well with each other on a relatively humanitarian, universal basis. More challenged, more difficult, more threatened.
So, Chuck, what about violence? Ben alluded to the fact that Europe is being rearmed, and one of our concerns after the war was not to have Europe rearm and get involved in these boundary disputes and wars as they had on two occasions in the 20th century. Where will violence fit in the end state?
Well, violence is already there. So the question of where it will progress to envelop beyond the Mideast, where it is, beyond the US, where ICE and Homeland Security and all those folks are taking it. This violent disruption of people's ability to access the basic survival elements of living: housing, food, water, air, education, healthcare, all those things, transportation. They're all being disrupted in very race-based, gender-based, caste-based ways. So the violence is likely to reflect that same race-based, gender-based, caste-based orientation.
David, what about public health, life expectancy, quality of life for families here and in Europe, maybe elsewhere? What does the end state contemplate? What do you see the end state including as changes in public health and, I guess, life expectancy?
All scary. A few days ago, the Texas Department of Public Health reported 422 measles cases. Measles is now in at least 15 other states. It's just expanded across the country. We've got a measles vaccine that we know is about 97% effective. Um, but people are not getting vaccinated. They're being encouraged not to get vaccinated. So, we're probably going to get another pandemic. Um, Avian flu has traveled from the birds to the cattle. I don't know how long it'll be to travel from the cattle to the people. It's really disturbing because when we had COVID, at least we had a CDC, um, and we had researchers who could come up with a vaccine. All of those people are being fired. When that avian flu migrates into the human population, we're not going to be prepared to create a vaccine. I don't know what that pandemic's going to look like, but to me, that's very scary. Um, we're dissolving the Department of Education, so we're going to be less educated, which I think is a goal of Trump because statistically we know that less educated people favored Republicans, are more susceptible to the misinformation, and that's perfectly in line with what he'd like to see. Sadly, I think that still, once upon a time, not that long ago, America still was seen as a beacon in the world. People still wanted to come here. It was a kind of an idealized place. We're certainly losing that. Um, the respect for our leadership in our country is declining rapidly. Long-term alliances that took decades to create are being shattered quickly in unbelievable ways. We're one of the luckiest countries in the world with our 3,000-mile border with Canada. They have this incredible, wonderful relationship with this country, and the current president is doing everything he can to damage that relationship. Then that's very scary. Um, Unemployment's going to climb for sure. Uh, kind of going to something that Chuck said, the world's going to be more, or our country's going to be more exclusionary. Um, People are not going to be, for example, with the Department of Education goes all of kind of the support services for persons with disabilities. Without those support services, they're not going to be able to participate in education, in our society. Exclusion is just going to increase. More and more people are going to be left out. And that links also into your question about violence. I grew up in a lower income community that was very close to some very, very affluent communities. Um, Lake Forest, Illinois, and Waukegan, Illinois, North Chicago. If you look up the demographics, those are very different places. Well, I was in the Waukegan, North Chicago side, as opposed to the Winnetka, Lake Forest side, that are very affluent communities. And again, just minutes away from each other. Uh, we knew that there was a lot, we didn't understand why things were so unevenly distributed, but we knew they were, and we couldn't really understand why and why it wasn't fair. And I grew up with kids that that stole, never thought twice about it. They felt that it was like the fair thing to do. Um, you could look at drive 15 minutes and see wealth that was so far beyond anything that we were experiencing that somehow this field felt like the right thing to do. And it's like just like a given in life. So when people are excluded and they feel disadvantaged and they see the disparities and they see no way to get to participate in that, I hate to say it, but I don't think it's irrational to decide to maybe take things and maybe to turn to violence. And that's going to happen. There's going to be more violence. There's going to be more crime. And again, I don't think it's completely irrational. It's just like it's the only choice I have. If I want to survive, if I want to feed my family, these are things I have to do. So, uh, yeah, so all of these things are really frightening to me in terms of this devolution of all the kind of things we've always aspired to. We're seeming to turn around 180 degrees and go the other direction, and that's really frightening.
Well, we can't go too much further without discussing how the rule of law is going to change, Ben. In the end state, what does the rule of law look like? What does the legal profession look like? What do the courts look like? What does democracy look like and voting rights and the things we have, assumed would continue? In the end state, how will they change?
we've had this theory floating around called what is it? Unified presidency, unified executive theory, that's been bandied about on the right for a long time. And you see, at least in these first 2 months, and with an aggressive way, that the constitutional language, which says that the executive power is vested in the president, is being looked at as being of primacy over everything else. So therefore, it's really limiting the powers of the presidency. The only way to do that is by impeaching the president and replacing him. But barring that happening, essentially the president has vast powers and can basically usurp every other part of the Constitution if there is not a willingness in Congress to replace. I would think that in the Trump world, that is exactly what he likes having right now, as a completely passive Congress that'll pass laws that he, in his wisdom, will ignore if he doesn't like them. So that's the kind of thing where you don't have statutes that are actually law. You have statutes, but it's not necessarily clear whether they will actually be implemented. And if they're implemented in a manner that is consistent with whatever Congress said. So that's one part of it. With regards to the other parts of it, there is no Attorney General of the United States. There is only an Attorney General of the President. And every part of the Department of Justice is essentially a tool of the president's will. And as a consequence, those vast powers can be turned in any direction they want based on the whims of the president in this vision. So this means that, you have the basic choice of whether you're going to dissent or you're going to comply. And you'll see more and more of the different parts of society that will comply. And in fact, I think you can see the president trying to become or having his minions be the heads of every major institution you can imagine in this country that would work to enforce his vision of how America should be. As to the courts, I don't think it'll be impeachment of judges, but it would be basically a steady process of replacing judges or intimidating judges or getting judges to retire so that you can put in place judges that will be agreeable with this unitary executive vision. And things like due process is going to disappear in this vision. It is what the president wants. That's going to be all that really matters. So it won't be in a rule of law. It'll be what the president wants. That's we've already seen it with some people being taken out of this country and without any due process. We've seen it with orders of judges not being complied with. We're already there on that. It's just a question of the degree that it's going to the acceleration of that. So,
okay, Chuck. In our lifetimes, borders have changed. I remember my own experience in going to Europe, where I found there was really actually no border between France and Germany. You could just drive your car right through. There would be no guard shack, not even a mark in the road for the border. That's kind of changing, and certainly we see a dynamic on borders, and tariffs are, I guess, part of borders, and the migrant issue is part of borders. How do you see that changing? How do you see the movement of people in this end state? How will it be between the U.S. and other countries, other groups of countries, the BRICS organization, the global South? and both Ben and David have referred to this, alluded to it. But my question to you is, how will borders and the movement of people change?
What we're seeing already is intended to amplify essentially without limits, so that Black, brown, and non-white people are threatened, bullied, intimidated, motivated, encouraged to leave. Or they're physically apprehended, whether there's just cause or legal cause, or even legal compliance, even procedural compliance. They're apprehended and they're removed. So I think it reflects back on the rule of law perspective that you and Ben and David have articulated. If you have no effective checks and balances on executive power that is used for racist, sexist, caste-based, exclusionary policies to favor a very, very small, wealthy percentage and group of the population. What's to stop that? And when you have that, people who see that wave coming and see a lack of effective opposition to it have two choices: either be subsumed by it or leave.
Well, some people are doing that now, which is really remarkable. My mother always used to say to me, "Thank God you were born in the United States. It's the best country in the world." Would she say that to me today? David, it troubles me to see Trump appoint himself the president or the leader, the chair, whatever it is, of the Kennedy Center in Washington. It troubles me to see the effect that he's had on the arts and on the creative activities in the country. It troubles me to see him do things that affect the economy and our quality of life. And of course, all these things we've been talking about, have an effect on our quality of life. If you put yourself in the shoes of somebody waking up in the morning, this is out of Kafka, you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you look like a cockroach. So my question to you is, how is our quality of life going to be affected in terms of jobs, in terms of, having free movement, having civil liberties, having freedom from racism and unfairness in the law? How is the economy going to do? Are we going to all be poor? Are we going to all lack medical care? What's the quality of life for, what was his name in the Kafka? The Kafka was called Metamorphosis. And we're talking about metamorphosis. We're talking about Gregor Samsa, who wakes up in the morning. Let's look at it through his eyes. What's his quality of life going to be like in the end state here?
Yeah, well, in answer to your questions, yes. Yes, those things are going to happen. Start with tariffs. And here's an interesting aside. As this program was going on, I say maybe about 26 minutes ago, I think it was live, but it's definitely today. Trump was talking about the tariffs and talking about how that will bring manufacturing back to the United States. And then he said, and go ahead and check this, we're going to need more immigrants to work in the factories. That's what he just said that 26 minutes ago. Contrary to all his efforts to deport everybody he could think of. So just an example of the chaos that's going on. Yeah, it's really disturbing. It's the leader of our country is saying, I want to be head of the Kennedy Center to make sure that we don't have DEI programming. I want my vice president to go to the National Zoo to make sure there's no evidence of DEI in the National Zoo. It's like, can't you do something that's going to help people? Are you so obsessed with this um, this idea that I've got to remove ideas of diversity and equity from our society, that I'm not going to do anything to help people. It's all going to be based on threats and challenges. Do this or else. Uh, and kind of getting back to that idea of rule of law and the idea we have to push back, it's really disturbing to see firms like Skadden Arps. Um, I think it's Wilkie Gallagher just today or yesterday agreed to, and they're calling it a settlement. It's like it's not a settlement. There's no dispute. What you're doing is you're just caving in. We use the expression bending the knee. You're not settling the dispute. You're just bowing and giving this president what he wants because you're afraid of how it might hurt your bottom line. And to their credit, there's some firms like Jenner and Block that are pushing back, but we need people to be pushing back. And if we don't, we're going to devolve into, as as Chuck and Ben were describing, this compliant society where things are just going to get worse and worse and worse. There are some flickers of hope. Next door, like 20 minutes, I can drive across the border to Wisconsin. And last night I was following every minute the AP reports on the Supreme Court election. That when 45% of the votes were in, it was about 15% margin. The rural votes starting coming in, so that started slipping a bit. So I'm counting the minutes of the percentages, hoping that Susan Crawford hangs on, and she does, and she wins that Supreme Court election by about 10% of the vote. And that's in a situation when Elon Musk came in, either directly or groups affiliated with him, spent about $25 million to support the Republican judicial candidate. And I say that because it was a Republican judicial candidate who campaigned wearing a MAGA hat and said, when I get elected to the Supreme Court, I will do everything Trump wants me to do. I was very explicit. And no pretense of judicial neutrality. But Wisconsin voters said, we don't like Elon Musk coming in here trying to buy our votes. They rejected him. And now Wisconsin will have it at least till 2028, barring some kind of something happening to an incumbent, will have a liberal majority on the court. So that's great. So that you are seeing some pushback, some success. That 2 seats in Florida, they were really long shots to win, but last time Mike Wallace, now our national security advisor, who was using Signal and giving away wartime secrets, had won his congressional seat by over 30%. This time that election was about 14%, cut that difference in half. And also with the Gay Valamon election, again, cut the difference in about half. Kind of a moral victory, but it is a moral victory. To close that gap and cut it in half means people are starting to connect the dots. And I think the one thing we have to do is, at least I would say, don't spend a lot of time pushing the incumbents, trying to get them to recognize their humanity and do better, because they're not going to do it. They've become soulless and have given everything up. I don't know if you saw the news about the Indiana Senator Jim Banks. There was a Health and Human Service worker who approached him in the elevator, and I said, I just got laid off. I'm not sure why. Is there anything you're doing about it? And this senator just replies, says, well, I'm sure you deserved it. And the guy was stunned and says, what do you mean I deserved it? And he says this, and it's all recorded. He says, well, I think you deserved it because you seem like a clown. That's just hateful and evil. I think people are connecting the dots and pushing back against that. And rather than trying to turn someone like that around by arguing rationally to him or trying to make the case of why he should change, I think what we need to do is connect the dots for the voters to say that, look, here's how you're being hurt by what's being done. Let's connect the dots as clearly as we can to the cuts in Medicaid, cuts in Medicare, to what's coming in Social Security. Understand how this is going to affect you. And next time you get a chance to vote in a local, statewide, or national election, understand the consequences of your previous votes and change them.
So, Ben, let's talk about the media. We've seen all kinds of issues coming up in the media. We've seen the deterioration of the notion of truth, alternative facts. We've seen media platforms arise that are being used exclusively to disinform us. In the end state, what does the media look like? What does truth look like? Who is speaking on what platform and what are they saying?
Going along the lines of the plutocratic vision that we're putting forward here, the media will be propaganda in favor of the Uber leader, right? Um, and I would suspect bread and circus, so distraction and propaganda. No, truth is not a part of this vision. I mean, there is truth, right? There are things like there are people who have measles, they are people and it is spreading and there are people getting sick, right? But getting the truth about what's going on there will be nigh on impossible. You have anybody who would start to take a position that is contrary to what the Uber leader would want. They'll, their owners will sell them to somebody who will do what the Uber leader wants, or the Federal Communications Commission will yank their license so that they can't operate. I mean, they're, if their policies of what's going on is not consistent with what the Uber leader would like, I mean, it's a situation where I would think that lots of people would recognize that there's something not true, almost like in the Soviet times with, reading Pravda. You could read Pravda, and that was the version of reality that they put forward. But, lots of people, I'm sure, in Russia and the Soviet Union didn't believe Pravda was, reflecting their reality. I mean, we have a Pravda media. What I just saw that Elon Musk, who has turned X into a propaganda machine, is putting in a bid for TikTok. It's going to be another kind of problem, that kind of concentrations. I think in this now we can talk about all these other media, the non-mainstream media and all that people like us, right? Great. So what'll happen to us? We will be made to disappear. We either get in line or get out. And then they can find their ways to do that. So there's this great silence. I see this great silence on truth, but lots of noise, like on propaganda in favor of whatever the party line is. You even see it now in the ads. Companies will do ads that'll, say how wonderful the president is, and all that kind of stuff. You see that kind of. I mean, to me, it looks like propaganda to me, But you just see it. It's just really kind of sad.
Well, what happens in a country or a world where truth is forfeit? What happens when the average citizen or resident is misinformed all day and he doesn't know what's going on? The arrangements are preventing him from finding out what's going on. What happens to that society?
Anything that the Uber leader wants to have happen is what I would say. I certainly believe that there be a process of restricting the vote to only essentially people who would vote the way that the Uber leader would like, whether overtly, directly, blocking people at the polls, but probably more insidiously with sort of rules that come up about what is it like? You have to prove your citizenship. And somebody will be. I know that women in, I think it was in Vermont or New Hampshire, were running into these difficulties because they couldn't they couldn't vote because they weren't in their records under their married name, or they had to go back home and find their birth certificate to show they were their maiden name, and so that they could vote. I mean, it's just a hassle, right? The idea is to make people have hassles. yes, there'll be welfare, but in order to do welfare, you need to be able to dunk the ball on a 10-foot basket. Okay, anybody can dunk the ball in a 10-foot basket, you get welfare. Oh, you can't? I'm terribly sorry. You're not eligible. You want unemployment? Absolutely, you can have unemployment, but it requires that you have a shoe size over 11. Oh, I'm sorry, you have a shoe size of 7. Terribly sorry, you can't get unemployment. I mean, I'm making up the thing, but you see the kind of putting all these little hurdles in different places. It reminds me actually of when they got rid of taxes, right? When the Reagan got rid of taxes, everything went to fees. Remember that there were all these new fees that were being charged by municipalities because of the tax cuts. So what used to be the free tennis court, now you had to pay, I don't know, $5 at the door. Oh, you don't have $5? Terribly sorry, you can't play tennis. You know what I mean? Got to play it against the wall. It's that kind of thing. Hurdles everywhere. And the end result is only those who have a lot can have what they want. Everybody else will just be dumb and sick. And that, by the way, old people, yes, you can have your Social Security. Yes, but do you wear glasses? Sorry, people who wear glasses can't have their Social Security. And I mean, I'm picking up absurd things, but the idea is to do these things. Or I even heard about this lady recently who got her refund from the IRS, and the refund said to the estate of her. And she got this check, and she was like, "What am I going to do with that?" And her lawyer said, "Do not cash that check. Send it back to the IRS to make it clear that you are still alive. Because if you cash that check, then it'll be concluded that you're dead. Therefore, your Social Security was, all this stuff." And who thought of this? Who thought of, let's change on the system to call people the estate of, add that. We can screw them all through the system with that if they're not, slick enough to figure this stuff out.
Given your examples about Social Security, and hypothesizing that maybe those wouldn't happen, but they're happening right now. So many people have been discharged that they've cut down phone service in Social Security offices. So if you have a problem or you need to claim benefits or clear any kind of confusion, you either got to go online with your computer or you got to travel to the office. Well, if the office is not convenient to you, or if you have a disability or you don't drive, and you're not, as many older people are, you might be in an area that doesn't have good internet service or don't even use a computer, you can't access Social Security. So the whole idea of putting up these barriers, that's an example that is happening today. And people are having tremendous difficulty accessing Social Security. And to the degree there still are some telephones, they never get answered. And people are reporting that there are recordings that say that you can anticipate a wait of maybe 3 to 4 hours. People are reporting that they go on and they'll wait all day, and they never get through. So this idea that we can change society by not necessarily ostensibly re-legislating it, but just by the way we manage it, is something that's happening right now, and that's really frightening. And Ben, you said something about, and again, it's happening right now. I don't know if Trump really thinks he can get a third term or really wants it. I don't know if he really wants Greenland, but he's got a lot of people talking about whether he can get a third term, whether he can take Greenland, while he's cut in another 10,000 from CDC, another God knows how many thousands from the IRS, and he's closing down the Department of Education. So if I can get you talking about Greenland, if I can get you talking about the Panama Canal, if I can get you talking about me going for a third term, you won't be talking about these other things. And that's, again, in that sense, he's a master manipulator, and he understands that. And this isn't the future. This is what's happening right now. So we're saying, what will the future look like? It's going to look like more of what we're seeing happening right now.
Yeah, well, you talk about Social Security. It's like the frog in the slowly boiling water. People, the country would jump out of the water if it was boiling. But if it's slowly boiling, then somehow you think that you're not going to be affected, be the next guy, so you don't raise a storm over it. Chuck, I want to talk about security. We're running out of time, but I do want to talk about security, personal security in the end state. We haven't made any progress whatsoever on gun control. Sorry about that. The Republicans have stood steadfastly in favor of more guns, more people, more violence with guns. And also, I worry about the military. I wonder about the military being deployed against civilians, a la Kent State. You can get a young fellow in uniform to shoot a citizen. You can get him to do that and query whether that's in the future for us. And you can also activate the police and train the police so that they're not particularly sympathetic to the people they're supposed to serve. And I wonder what the end state looks like in terms of the engagement between the average citizen and a lack of security, an increase in violence, and draconian maneuvers by both the military and the police.
I think we need to understand that as increasingly dangerous as our personal physical safety, well-being, security, stability in our personal lives, in our work, our identity security, which makes us subject to attack for who we choose to be as a person, what we say, what we do, who we ally with. Those basic human rights, not just civil rights, but human rights, that are elements of our very mental, emotional, peace of mind, stability, well-being. That's what's at risk here. And those are what are under attack. It's not just our physical well-being.
Let me go around the table here for closing comments, if you guys don't mind. I'd like to start with David Larson. And I hope you guys will also address, we haven't spent enough time on it, the manifest destiny doctrine that is in play right now, and the problems in our diplomacy and our efforts or lack of efforts to deal with our former allies and the two areas in gross conflict, and with a third perhaps coming soon between China and Taiwan. Where does the United States stand globally in the end state? David?
To the degree that we've historically believed, at least in the recent history, that there is an international law and there is sovereignty, and that sovereign rights should be protected. And that's one reason why we've supported Ukraine until the current administration. We now have a president who admires expressly dictators like Putin, and sees Putin moving in Ukraine and says that, geez, I can be as powerful as Putin by taking Greenland, or I can show I'm as powerful as he is by seizing the Panama Canal. So it's very frightening, that kind of shift in perspective, that it's perfectly acceptable to go at smaller, weaker countries and take control of them in an effort to enhance, at least if you believe it, to enhance your own power as a leader and as a country. So, and again, I'm hoping, I guess, that those are distractions, that he doesn't really believe he's going to do that. I think there is an element of truth there, and it's only because over his both terms as president, he's admired dictators and even complimentary comments about Adolf Hitler. And, so that's in him. And the idea that he actually might move forward or try to at some point like that, because we've got people in the administration like Pete Hegseth, and they're not going to stop him. What used to be the kind of administrative checks that maybe slowed him down in his first term, they're gone. And, whatever he wants to do, people will fall in line. And that's really frightening.
You bet. Chuck, how about you? Your thoughts about the position of the United States in the global order? Where does that fit in the end state? And will we like that or will we hate it? We meaning the ordinary citizen. Can you talk about that in terms of your closing comments?
Yeah, well, there are going to be essentially three bases of evaluation on the part of other countries as to where that status of the U.S. goes and where it winds up being. One will be like Canada, Mexico, France, and others now, that will be essentially merit-based and independent. Give them credit for that. Another over on the other end of the spectrum, Putin, Erdogan, others, will be laudatory because that's exactly what they want to do. They want to see the U.S. essentially crumble in world influence, in world respect, in world relations, because it opens up acquisition opportunities for them. Not to mention China's, which will operate independently of all the others, and so far to a great deal of success because of the economic influence they've had over infrastructure and environmental resources in other countries, Asia, Africa, South America, and others, and that will increase. And then the third will be those who try to stand back and remain neutral and stay out of the fray and be unaffected by it. And those will be smaller, less influential countries. So it'll be interesting to see where Australia, Germany, and some of the others go in the coming years, because they have their own struggles over political directions and influence within their own countries and their relations. Good question.
Yeah, well, and their economies, because the world is interdependent, and if the economy of the United States fails or declines, it's going to affect a lot of other countries, even if they resist. So, Ben, you're the anchor man on this, if you don't mind.
No,
I'd like to ask you for your closing comments, but I'd like to insinuate one question, hopefully that you can deal with. When we reach the end state, and I think it's clear from this discussion that it's not that far off. When we reach the end state, where, Ben, do you want to be? Do you want to be here or somewhere else?
it won't make a difference because it will all be the end state. Okay? I mean, maybe slight differences, but I used to work for somebody who was one of the people who used to develop the World Economic Forum. I mean, it was one of the key players in developing that. And one of the things she said at one point that I found horrible, but it was interesting. She said, there are people in the world where you really don't care whether you have their respect or not. You just don't care. Okay. And I was like, one of the harshest things I've ever heard somebody say, right? And that kind of an attitude is the one that is at the center of all this. And so vast amounts of people in this country don't care about if you're even loyal, don't care about you because even if you protest, don't care. So the other thing that I keep coming back to, and I've written something that hopefully will come out soon, is there's this concept of in the military I read about at one point about called force drift, which is basically you use force and there are certain rules that dictate how, like the rules of engagement, how you use the force. So to the extent that the rules are very narrow, you use force in a narrow way. But to the extent that the rules are not narrow, what happens is that you go from sort of not using so much force, you drift inevitably towards more and more use of force. And now we're looking at a situation where there isn't even a barrier on that side, a guardrail. So this kind of government, both externally and I think internally, continues to just move farther and farther in exercising force against anyone it wants to. And there's nothing that you can do to counter that, except you possibly, what will happen is that there's a contradiction that is just too much for somebody. It's just too much. And so they will protest and they'll get shot. Okay. But the force will be domestically and internationally. You just have the doubling down of use of force with no guardrails. Only if there's somebody else who comes at the counter force of significant level, like maybe China, then there's going to be a negotiation between the two forces. But there's nothing in there except force, and that's where I think we end up. So there's nowhere to hide.
We'll have to leave it there. This has been a really interesting discussion. And Ben, for you special, I want to say this. May the force be with you, Ben. Thanks so much.
Beautiful.
Thanks so much to our co-host Ben Davis and our esteemed guest David Larson and Chuck Crumpton. I'm Jay Fidell, host of American Issues Take One. We've been discussing if Trump has his way, what will the country look like? What is the end state? Thank you to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.